I didn't quit my marriage. Not really. I just finally woke up and realized I'd been in it alone for years. And the only person surprised when I stopped carrying both of us was the one who'd forgotten how to walk on her own. It's a simple thought, but it sums up a decade of my life, a decade where I slowly became less of a partner and more of a full-service life support system for someone who genuinely believed she was entitled to my labor, but wasn't responsible for any of her own. Emily and I, we met in college, you know? One of those random study groups for organic chemistry that somehow spiraled into late-night diner runs, sharing fries and dreams, and then, eventually, something real. For years, everything felt balanced, good. Like we were actually building something. We got married young, maybe a little too young, according to her mom, Susan, who made sure to point that out at every holiday dinner. Our son, Noah, came along when I was 26, Emily was 25. 3 years later, after we'd finally figured out how to keep one tiny human alive, our daughter Chloe arrived. The plan was always for Emily to stay home with them. Not because I demanded it, or because I'm some relic from the 1950s. She said it herself, she wanted to be there for their early years, didn't want to miss a single important moment. And I supported that, completely. I believed we were on the same team. I worked in project management for a tech company. Nothing glamorous, but it paid well enough that we could live on one income, if we were careful. For the first few years, Emily seemed happy with it. Or at least, she never complained directly to me. But then, somewhere around Chloe's second birthday, it was like someone flipped a switch. Emily changed from an engaged partner to a completely checked-out roommate. One who occasionally reminded me she'd given birth twice. She started sleeping until 9 or 10 in the morning, even though both kids were up at 6:30. That meant I was getting them dressed, fed, and out the door to daycare before my own workday even began. And when I'd get home at 6, the house would look like a tornado had hit it. Toys everywhere, dishes piled in the sink from breakfast I'd cleaned up after the night before, laundry overflowing. And Emily? She'd be on the couch, scrolling through her phone, or watching some Netflix show about people with problems far more dramatic than ours. I'm not exaggerating when I say I was doing everything. And I mean everything. I kept a mental list just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. Up at 5:30 for a quick run, that was my only 30 minutes. Shower, wake the kids, make breakfast for everyone, including Emily, who'd stumble out of bed just as we were leaving. Drop Noah at school, Chloe at daycare. A full 9-hour workday. Pick up both kids. Come home, make dinner, help Noah with homework, do bath time, bedtime routines, clean the kitchen, prep tomorrow's lunches. Maybe, if I was lucky, I'd sit down at 9 p.m. for an hour before I passed out. Emily's contribution? Usually commenting on how tired she was, how hard it was being home with the kids all day, even though they were literally in school and daycare for 6 hours, and how I just didn't understand the mental load of running a household. That mental load became her favorite excuse. She'd read an article about emotional labor, and suddenly every request I made was me adding to her invisible burden. Never mind that the actual, visible labor was all landing on my shoulders. I tried talking to her about it, maybe a dozen times. Gentle conversations. Hey, I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed, I could really use some help with the daily stuff. She'd respond with lectures about how invalidating it was that I didn't recognize all the things she did that I couldn't see. What things? I wanted to scream. Asterisk, what exactly are you doing that's so invisible? Because I can see pretty clearly that you're not doing the laundry, or the dishes, or the cooking, or the cleaning, or the child rearing, asterisk, but I never screamed. I was trying to be the reasonable one. Then came the incident that truly opened my eyes. The kitchen drawer where we kept utensils had broken. The slider mechanism was off the track, the whole thing hanging at an angle. I'd planned to fix it properly over the weekend, it needed the right parts from the hardware store. Emily called me at work, absolutely frantic, saying she needed a fork and couldn't get into the drawer. This was exactly the kind of thing I always let slide until it became a crisis, which was rich coming from someone who hadn't fixed a single thing in our house in the entire time we'd lived there. "Can you just come home and fix this?" she demanded. I explained, very calmly, that I was in the middle of a client presentation and couldn't leave, but I'd handle it that evening. "I need a fork right now, Mason," she said, her voice getting that sharp edge it always did when she wasn't getting her way. "So, open the drawer manually, or use a spoon, or literally just grab a fork from the dishwasher," I replied, trying not to lose my patience with people staring at me from across the conference table. That's when she hit me with it. The phrase that would become the soundtrack to our marriage's slow, agonizing death. Her voice dripped with contempt. "I'm not asking you to be my handyman. I'm asking for basic help. But I guess I forgot. I'm not your mom, so it's not my job to take care of you." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. The irony was so thick you could cut it with one of the forks she apparently couldn't access. "You're right," I said. Probably louder than I should have in a professional setting. "You're not my mom." Which is great, because my mom, Brenda, actually helped my dad and didn't spend all day complaining about how hard it was to exist in a house someone else paid for. I hung up, finished my presentation somehow, and drove home that evening knowing something had fundamentally broken, something we probably couldn't fix. The drawer was still hanging off the track when I got there. Emily was locked in our bedroom. Both kids were in front of the TV, watching YouTube videos that were definitely not age-appropriate, because nobody had bothered to supervise them. I did a quick temporary fix with duct tape, just to make it functional. Made dinner. Did the whole evening routine by myself while Emily stayed in the bedroom, doing God knows what. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I'd become the only parent in a two-parent household. That's when it hit me, really hit me, I wasn't in a partnership at all. I was running a full-service life support system for someone who thought she was entitled to my labor, but not responsible for any of her own. And the worst part? She convinced herself she was the victim in all of it. I fell asleep with one thought running through my head like a mantra: what happens if I just stop doing everything and let the consequences land where they're supposed to? The next morning, I woke up and made a decision that probably should have come years earlier. I was done being the only adult in this house who gave a damn about keeping our lives from falling apart. I didn't announce it. Didn't sit Emily down for some dramatic conversation about how things were going to change. I just quietly stopped doing all the extra stuff that had somehow become my responsibility, even though we were supposed to be equal partners. No more fixing things the second they broke. No more jumping in to solve problems Emily created through her own negligence. No more pretending that her complete disengagement from our family life was normal or acceptable. The first test came maybe 3 days later. Emily walked into my home office, where I was finishing up some emails before dinner, holding that same kitchen drawer. My duct tape fix had apparently given up. She announced that the thing was broken again, like she was reporting a natural disaster. And I could see she expected me to drop everything and handle it immediately, the way I always had. I looked up from my laptop, looked at the drawer, then back at her face, and said, very calmly, that it was unfortunate. In that tone you use when someone tells you information that doesn't require your action. She stood there for a solid 10 seconds, clearly waiting for me to elaborate or offer to fix it. When I just went back to typing, she huffed out loud, like a teenager told no. She demanded to know if I was going to fix it, her voice getting shrill in that way that used to make me cave immediately, because I hated conflict. I replied with a simple no, without even looking up, my fingers still moving across the keyboard like this was the most normal conversation in the world. She practically shouted, asking why not. I could feel her getting more agitated by the second, because this wasn't following the script we'd been acting out for years. I stopped typing, leaned back in my chair, looked her dead in the eye, and said, because I'm not your dad, Emily. With the exact same inflection she'd used on me dozens of times. The look on her face was worth every uncomfortable second that followed. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she just turned around and walked out, the broken drawer still in her hands, slamming the office door hard enough that I heard Noah ask from the living room if everything was okay. That became my new default response to everything. A polite declination, followed by her own words thrown back at her. Watching her try to process this role reversal was almost funny, except it was also deeply sad. Emily had spent so long treating me like a combination of ATM, handyman, and personal assistant that she genuinely seemed confused when I stopped playing along. Like she couldn't compute that actions have consequences, and relationships require actual reciprocity. The house started falling apart in small ways. Not catastrophically, but enough to be noticeable. Things I would have normally handled before they became problems just sat there, getting worse. The garage door opener died and stayed dead for 2 weeks because Emily kept saying she'd call someone, but never did. So, she had to manually open it every time she needed to leave, which was maybe twice a week, because she rarely went anywhere. One of the kitchen cabinet doors came completely off its hinges and just leaned against the wall for days while Emily stepped around it, occasionally commenting to me that it was dangerous and someone really should do something about it. The lawn grew wild because the mower ran out of gas, and apparently filling it was beyond Emily's capabilities, even though I'd shown her how to do it 3 separate times, and it literally involved unscrewing a cap and pouring. I kept the kids fed and clean and happy, kept my own work and responsibilities handled. But everything that fell into the category of household maintenance that Emily should have been contributing to just didn't get done. I watched with morbid curiosity to see how long it would take her to either step up or completely melt down. What I didn't expect was the financial weirdness that started showing up when I actually sat down and looked at our bank statements instead of just glancing at the balances. We had a joint checking account that my paychecks went into, and I'd always trusted Emily to be reasonable about spending, since she wasn't working and we'd agreed on a budget. But when I pulled 3 months of statements, I found hundreds of small transfers to her personal account that I'd never noticed before. $50 here, $80 there, sometimes $120. Never enough to trigger alarm bells, but adding up to almost $2,000 over the quarter. And every single transfer had vague descriptions like personal expenses or miscellaneous, which told me exactly nothing. I started documenting everything. Not because I was planning anything specific yet, but because some instinct told me I needed a paper trail of what our actual life looked like. I took photos of the house in its natural state, the mess that accumulated when I wasn't constantly cleaning, the evidence that Emily wasn't doing the childcare she claimed was so exhausting. I screenshotted financial records, saved text message conversations where she'd refused to help with basic tasks, kept a log of who was actually parenting our kids versus who was just existing in the same building as them. My brother, Mark, came over one afternoon to help me install a new water heater because the old one had died, and I wasn't about to let my kids take cold showers just to prove a point. He took one look around the house and asked me point blank if everything was okay in my marriage. I gestured at the general chaos and asked him if it looked okay. He just shook his head and told me something that stuck with me, that I didn't have to live like this. I knew, of course. I knew. But knowing and doing are 2 very different things when you've got 2 kids and a decade of history and some stupid hope that maybe things could still turn around. That hope died completely the day I came home early from work because a client meeting got cancelled. I walked in to hear Emily on the phone in our bedroom, her door not quite closed all the way. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was literally just standing in the hallway, about to announce I was home, when I heard her say, "No, I'm done. I've been done for months. I just need to figure out the cleanest way to exit." Her tone was way too casual for the bomb she'd just dropped. My heart literally stopped, just completely froze in my chest. I stood there like an idiot, listening to her continue, telling whoever was on the other end that I'd be blindsided, but that wasn't her problem. And that she'd been talking to her life coach about how to handle the whole situation without looking like the bad guy. Ice water in my veins. That's what it felt like. Pure ice water replacing my blood, as I realized my wife wasn't just checked out, she was actively planning her escape, treating our marriage like a PR campaign she needed to manage. I backed up quietly, went back outside, sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes trying to process what I'd just heard. Then I pulled out my phone and searched for divorce attorneys in our area. I called the first one with good reviews, a woman named Sarah, who had a calm, no-nonsense voice. I laid out the basics of my situation in the parking lot of my own house, because I couldn't risk Emily overhearing. Sarah listened to everything: the weaponized incompetence, the financial shoddiness, the overheard conversation. Then she said something that changed everything. "If you think she's planning something, you need to act like she's already executed it." Those words hit me like a freight train, because she was absolutely right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there next to Emily in our bed, watching her breathe peacefully, like she wasn't actively plotting to blow up our kids' lives. I made my decision. She thought she was going to control this narrative. Thought she was going to exit on her terms and paint me as the villain who didn't appreciate her. But I'd been documenting everything, and I had the truth on my side. If she wanted a clean exit, she was about to find out that clean doesn't mean easy. I spent the next 2 weeks moving in complete silence, meeting with Sarah 3 more times to go over strategy and documentation. She walked me through every single step, like we were planning a military operation, which I guess, in a way, we were. She told me to keep acting normal. Don't change my routine. Don't give Emily any indication that I knew what she was planning. And definitely don't confront her, because that would just give her time to prepare her own counterattack. So, I played the role of oblivious husband for 14 days, making dinner, doing bedtime routines, and pretending I didn't know my wife was planning to ambush me with some carefully crafted exit speech. Honestly, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because every time she looked at me, I wanted to scream that I knew everything. Sarah advised me to open a separate bank account and be ready to move money the moment I filed. Not before, because any premature transfers could look bad in court. So, I had everything set up and waiting, like a loaded gun. Then Emily made her move, and the timing was almost funny, because she clearly thought she was being strategic about it. It was a Friday evening. The kids were at Susan's house for a sleepover that Emily had arranged earlier in the week. Looking back, I should have known something was up, because Emily never voluntarily dealt with coordinating kid logistics. She'd made this whole production of cooking dinner for just the 2 of us, which should have been my first red flag, because Emily hadn't cooked anything more complicated than toast in about 18 months. We sat down at the table with her mediocre pasta, and she had this weird, calm expression on her face, like she'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in the mirror. Then she just came out with it. She told me, very matter-of-factly, that she wasn't happy. Hadn't been happy for a long time, and she thought it would be best for everyone if we separated and eventually divorced. All delivered in this cold, corporate tone, like she was firing an underperforming employee. I watched her face as she spoke, looking for any sign of emotion, or regret, or even basic human feeling. There was nothing there, except maybe relief that she was finally saying the words out loud. She kept talking, saying things about how we'd grown apart and wanted different things, and how this didn't have to be ugly if we could just be adults about it. I realized she was expecting me to fight back, to beg her to reconsider, to give her the dramatic scene she probably fantasized about, where she got to be the reasonable one. Instead, I just nodded slowly, took a sip of water, and said, "Okay, if that's what you want." In the most neutral voice I could manage. I swear the confusion that flashed across her face was priceless. She actually stammered, clearly thrown off by my lack of resistance, and asked if I understood what she was saying, like maybe I was too stupid to grasp that my marriage was ending. I told her, very calmly, that I understood perfectly, that if she wanted a divorce, then we'd get a divorce, and that I hoped we could handle it maturely for the kids' sake. Basically giving her exactly what she claimed to want, while watching her try to process why this wasn't going according to her script. She recovered quickly though, that cold mask sliding back into place. She started talking about logistics, and how we divide things, and how she'd probably keep the house since she was the primary caregiver. I just kept nodding and agreeing in principle, while thinking about the process server who'd be knocking on our door in approximately 12 hours and the bank transfers I'd be executing at dawn. I slept on the couch that night, not because she asked me to, but because I couldn't stand being in the same bed with her. I lay there in the dark, listening to her move around upstairs, wondering if she was texting her life coach about how smoothly her big announcement had gone. Saturday morning came early for me. I was up at 6 a.m. By 6:30, I'd executed the bank transfers Sarah had prepared, moving exactly half of our joint savings into my new account. Then I made coffee and waited. At exactly 9 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Emily was still upstairs, sleeping in, because why would today be any different? I answered it and took the envelope from the process server while she was still in her bathrobe. I went to the bottom of the staircase and called up that she had a visitor, my voice steady and calm, like I was announcing a package delivery. She came down, looking annoyed and disheveled, probably thinking it was a neighbor or someone selling something. The process server handed her the papers and explained, very professionally, that she was being served with divorce proceedings. I watched her face cycle through emotions so fast it was almost comical. Confusion melting into shock, melting into something that looked almost like betrayal, before finally landing on pure fury. She started to say something to the process server, her voice rising, but he just gave a polite nod and walked back to his car, because his job was done and he'd clearly dealt with worse. Emily spun around to face me, holding the papers in her shaking hands. The look she gave me was something I'd never seen before, like she couldn't quite believe I was real. She demanded to know what I'd done. Her voice was tight and controlled, in that way that meant she was absolutely losing it internally. I explained, very calmly, that I'd filed for divorce, just like she wanted. I just handled it first, to make sure everything was processed fairly and legally. She started yelling then, really yelling, about how I'd ambushed her, and how this wasn't how it was supposed to happen, and how dare I do this without warning her first. The irony was so thick I almost laughed, because apparently warning your spouse was only required when the request came from her side. I let her yell herself out while I sipped my coffee. Just standing there, watching this person I'd spent a decade with completely fall apart over losing control of something she'd literally asked for less than 12 hours ago. Then I suggested, very calmly, that she should probably read through the documents, especially pages 3 through 7, because there was a lot of important information in there. That's when she actually sat down and started reading. I watched her face go from red with anger to white as paper as she got to the section about asset protection and the temporary financial orders and the custody filing. She looked up at me with these wide eyes and asked, in this small voice, if I'd really frozen the accounts. I explained that I'd secured our assets exactly as my attorney had advised. And yes, I'd filed for primary custody of Noah and Chloe, because the documentation clearly showed who'd been doing the actual parenting for the past 2 years. She kept reading, getting paler with each page. When she got to the exhibit section, with all my photos and bank records and text message screenshots, something in her just broke. She started crying. These big, gasping sobs, but they weren't sad tears. They were angry tears, frustrated tears, the tears of someone who'd just realized they'd been playing checkers while I was playing chess. The next few weeks were absolutely brutal. Not because the legal process was complicated, but because Emily completely lost her mind when she realized she couldn't control the story anymore. Her parents called me within 24 hours. Her mom, Susan, screaming about how I was destroying their daughter, and how could I be so cruel. I very calmly told them I'd be happy to send over the documentation if they wanted to see what their daughter had actually been doing for the past 2 years. They went silent after that. No more calls, no more accusations, just radio silence that told me everything I needed to know about what they'd seen in those files. Her friends started backing away, too. The ones who'd been all supportive of her whole "my husband doesn't appreciate me" narrative suddenly got real quiet when they saw actual evidence of who was doing what in our marriage. Emily tried coming back to the house multiple times during the separation period, always using the kids as an excuse, but really just wanted to talk about how we were throwing away 10 years over nothing, and how maybe we'd both overreacted and wasn't there some way to fix this. I told her the same thing every single time, that the marriage was over, that I'd given her years to be a partner, and she'd chosen not to be, and that I wasn't interested in fixing something she'd already decided to destroy. She just hadn't expected me to light the match first. The divorce finalized after 4 months, faster than I'd expected, because Emily eventually realized that fighting me wasn't going to get her anywhere when I had documentation for everything. I got primary custody, with her getting the kids every other weekend. She kept her car and her personal savings, and we split the house equity 50-50, which meant selling it and both of us moving into smaller places. Noah and Chloe adjusted better than I'd feared. Kids are resilient like that. Having a stable routine with one parent who was actually present turned out to be way better than living in a house with 2 parents where only one gave a damn. I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect now, or that I don't have moments where I wonder if I could have done something different earlier. But mostly, I just feel this overwhelming sense of relief, like I've been carrying a weight that was crushing me and someone finally let me put it down. Emily's living her own life now, doing whatever it is she does with her life coach and her yoga classes and her personal journey or whatever she's calling it these days. Honestly, I don't think about her much, except when she's late picking up the kids or forgets to send back Chloe's inhaler. The thing that keeps running through my head, the one thought that sums up this whole mess better than anything else I could say, is pretty simple. I didn't quit the marriage. I just finally woke up and realized I'd been in it alone for years. And the only person who was surprised when I stopped carrying both of us was the one who'd forgotten how to walk on her own. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you were the only one holding things together, how long did it take you to finally realize you were alone?